Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And for some of you, you're not seeing things. This is sort of a double post. This video was on the Simon Says Stamp YouTube channel. I'll post a link to that in the description box below the video. Trying out something new. We'll see where it goes. Posting it here too so I can add it to my playlist. Oldies but goodies. For those that have, watched my content for a long time, you know what's coming. For those that are new, hello, welcome to the chaos. I have a slight obsession with the Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Flowers stamp set. I have done many videos, dozens of videos. At the end of this video, in the end screen, I will link to my playlist that has all the videos I've done since this set was released several years ago. And I continue to use it because I love it. Just like I continue to use other older products, reimagining them in new ways, mixing them with other favorites, with other new products, etc. So that's what I did for today's cards. I used some other oldie but goodie favorites as well as a couple of new products. And then, made a couple cards with just my all-time favorite set. And as always, everything I used will be listed and linked in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I do get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. That is what helps pay the bills, keeps the lights on, enables me to keep bringing out content. And let's get right into making these cards. So, the Beautiful Flowers stamp set. Like I said in the intro, one of my all-time favorites. This was released many years ago as part of a card kit. And for me, it was one of the first, if not the first, very large floral stamp set. And as I mentioned, I've used this set so many times. I love it. Mine is very stained, very well loved. And the thing to remember with whether you're using, good quality photopolymer stamps like this or if they're red rubber, the more you use them, the more stained they get, the better they stamp. Like, the detail on this set is one of the reasons I love it, but it stamps so well, which sounds silly because you can't see anything at the moment, but we'll get there. What I'm doing right now is I have a piece of watercolor paper, and I'm using the 3 individual flowers from the set, and I'd used my Simon anti-static powder on the watercolor paper that helps prevent embossing powder from clinging to anything other than the stamped image. And I'm inking up and stamping these florals with Simon's clear embossing ink. And I'd stamped it a couple times and then rotated it and stamped again because the panel was big enough. I was like, why not do everything twice and make 2 cards? Why not? So, like I said, you guys couldn't really see that on camera, but you can kind of sort of see the sheen, like the light reflecting on it in real life. So I was able to see that it's like, okay, it's stamped, we're good. Rotate, stamp again. And then I coated everything with Simon's Detail Gold embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and then got my heat tool out, warmed that up for a few seconds, and then I'm going to melt all of this with my heat tool until it's all smooth and shiny and fabulous. Because melting embossing powder will always be like magic, and especially metallics. especially gold. When it melts, it's just like, oh, I love it. I love it. It's so pretty. So I did the heat embossing one because who doesn't love heat embossing and gold, and it's fabulous, but also because it creates raised edges, which just makes watercolor so much easier. And this watercolor is going to be super simple. I'm actually going to really speed this up in editing. It still didn't take that long. But I'm using some of Simon's Pawsitively saturated inks to color these. I chose 3 colors. I've got Mist, Pansy, and Clay. And I just pressed the ink pads onto my little plastic palette. And then I've got a watercolor brush. And off camera, I've got just a jar of water that I'm swirling my brush in between colors, things like that. And then painting. Paint with the clean water first. And then I swirl my brush in the ink and paint with that. And one of the reasons I love this stamp set so much is all that detail makes it super easy to color because the detail is already there. The stamped image has all of that line detail for shading and depth and everything else. So you can just slap the color on. I say that a lot in my videos, like I just slapped the color on, but I mean it. Because ones like this, instead of just a simple outline, which is also fabulous, nothing wrong with a simple outline, but when it's a simple outline, that's all you see is the coloring because there's just, just a line. But with ones like this where there's just so much detail, it kind of takes away from whether or not your coloring is very good. And yet the funny thing is images like this feel very overwhelming because they are so detailed. But trust me, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I didn't do anything special. I didn't mix like lighter shades, darker shades, building depth or dimension or anything. I used one color per flower, with the exception of I added cocoa to a couple of the flower centers, and that was it. Easy, super easy. And this watercolor paper that I'm using works so nicely with Simon's Positively Saturated inks. It's like they were just meant to go together. The inks just flow on this watercolor paper, and it makes me happy. So I worked my way through all of the different florals with these 3 colors of ink. And then once I've finished those, I grabbed another panel of the same watercolor paper, and I'm just going to basically create a quick little background. I'm going to die cut from this. So I'm going to use that same mist color, but I also pulled in Raindrop, which is a darker shade. And all I'm doing is, again, just applying water first. This just enables the inks to move a little freer. And I'm painting on the mist color first. And then I'm going to splatter on the Raindrop over it. And because I'm not drawing anything in between, the splatter is going to move. It's going to like spread out. If you want defined splatter, you want to keep it little round splattery droplets. You want whatever you're splattering on top of to be completely dry. If you want it to move and blend like I'm doing here, wet on wet. So I'm splattering on that Raindrop color, and then I'm even going to splatter on the clay color as well, just for funsies. It's just going to create some texture and a bit of color, and I'm going to die cut this. So I'm just having fun, just kind of experimenting. And you can kind of see there right in the kind of middle upper portion where there's that darker splatter area, the background had dried. So that's what I'm talking about how like having things a little more defined is when you're splattering on top of dry. And I didn't want that, so I actually go over it with a wet brush and just let it kind of do its thing, because I just want this to be very sort of moody, blended texture, because I'm going to die cut it. And I end up doing this twice. I did it a second time off camera once I was kind of happy with how this turned out, so I had enough pieces to die cut from. And then everything's now dry, ready to go. You always want to make sure whatever you've colored is fully dry before you die cut it, because you do not want the watercolor paper to like tear or anything like that. So everything's dry. I use the coordinating die set for the beautiful flowers to die cut the florals. And then for that like moody little background I'm using the newer Fancy Feathers Wafer dies and die cut that. So I've got some florals and then I've got some feathers, and this will all come together. So I die cut my feathers, and like I mentioned, I did a second panel off camera. So now I've got all my little feather die cuts, and I decided to enhance these even more. So I took my clear embossing ink and just a little sponge applicator, and I'm just lightly sponging the clear ink just on the tips of these feathers. And that clear ink is sticky. It's the same ink I used to stamp the flowers at the beginning. And then I can add that gold embossing powder, and it's going to stick to the sticky ink, and it's just going to give an extra little something. You could also just like kind of press the die cuts into the ink pad. The sponge applicator just gives me a chance to be a little more precise and kind of feather the ink out a little bit, which, yeah. So once I've got the embossing powder on all of those, same thing, I'm going to melt it with my heat tool after I put the lid on the container, because, knock that thing over once. Not fun. So melted all of that with my heat tool. So now I've got the feathers with that texture and the color and then the gold on the ends. And Love it. Love it. So went through, melted all of that on all of these, and then the feathers are complete. So once the feathers are done, I want to work on the backgrounds for my card bases. And I've got, again, that same Strathmore watercolor paper. And I'm going to line this up on my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp the large floral from this set, the one that I love it. I love it. Those individual flowers are the exact same as this large one, so you can layer them as well. I've done that in past videos. But for this is just going to be my background. So I've got the watercolor paper, and I've inked up this image with that cocoa ink that I use to paint the flower centers. And this ink, it's Simon's Positively Saturated ink, so it is water reactive. So if what I'm going to do next freaks you out, if you don't want your image to run or anything like that, stamp it in a non-water reactive ink like StazOn or Tim Holtz archival ink. You know, there's a couple of brown ones that work for that. That would work as well. But I don't care. I did this on purpose. I wanted it to run. Because what I'm doing is I took that mist ink now and I had smushed it onto the palette. And then I'm picking it up with a watercolor brush and really loading my brush so there's like a lot of liquid on it. And then pressing it to the watercolor paper. And then you saw me like tapping it on my work surface to let gravity do its work and just pull those droplets downwards. So I've just got this like runny section. This was just to create some texture, and honestly, it's kind of fun. This kind of stuff used to really freak me out when I would see other makers or like watercolor artists do things like this, and it's like, what? Why? You know? It's fun. It's fun to play around with water, muck around, make a mess, do it intentionally, and just see where it goes. And the fun thing with stuff like this is you never know. You know, I'm letting gravity sort of do its thing. I'm also kind of drawing on a little bit with the paintbrush. And yeah, it's mixing with that brown that I stamped the florals in. But also, this is all going to be in the background. This is not the focus of my card. So it's just going to create a little bit of interest. So after this was completely dry, I did end up trimming these down to about 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And then I'm also going to rough up the edges quite a bit because I don't know. Again, there's something weirdly satisfying about intentionally being messy, intentionally sort of slightly wrecking things, ripping your cardstock. I like it. So I'm using my little Tim Holtz thread cutter paper distresser tool. You could also use the edge of scissors, your fingernails. I don't really recommend using your fingernails, but that works too, to just rough up the edges. It just creates, again, a little more texture, a little more interest. So after I'd done that, I've got some of Simon Says Stamps dark chocolate cardstock. I love this. It is so dark. Sometimes on camera it looks black, but it's just super dark brown. And I cut it to slightly larger than those panels and then adhered them together. And then another die cut, which is another oldie but goodie favorite, is the Privet branch wafer die that I have used so many times. And I die cut that from the same dark chocolate cardstock and then just adhered it to the background. And then I'm going to adhere those feathers that I had watercolored and edged with the gold embossing powder. And then the 3 flowers, I'm going to pop up with some thin foam squares just to give them a bit of dimension. So get those into place. And then once I've got the florals adhered, we're going to add some splatter. And I'd already, since I was doing 2 cards in one sitting, I had already finished the other card front, which just makes it easy to kind of follow along and do the second one. So once I've got everything adhered, I'm going to put these into my splat box. And then I've got my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors little watercolor palette here. And I added a bit of water to one of the wells. And then I'm just mixing that up really, really well with my fan brush. And then once I get it good and mixed up, I am going to splatter both of these card fronts with that gold watercolor. And it's just going to give it that little extra something. And the splatter also helps cover up. There was a couple spots where I got smudges like fingerprints. That's another reason why I love splatter so much. It helps cover that up. So added a good healthy dose of splatter to these and then set those aside to dry. And while they were drying, I heat embossed the Happy Birthday sentiment from the Beautiful Flowers stamp set. So I gold heat embossed it onto scraps of white cardstock. And then I die cut them with Simon's Sentiment Label wafer dies. And then I'm adding that Pansy ink. That's the color that I use to watercolor one of the flowers. I'm just blending that over top with a blending brush. And because these sentiments were gold heat embossed, the heat embossing is going to resist the ink. And this is going to soften and dry back and be a little bit lighter when it's fully dry. All of Simon's positively saturated inks, they soften a bit and like smooth out and then dry back. So after I've done the blending, I take my little microfiber cloth and I just buff it over top of the heat embossing so that any ink that was sitting on top of the sentiments just wipes away. And then I took my scissors. I was feeling a little brave. I've talked about I can't cut a straight line anymore to save my life more often than not. So you could use your paper cutter to cut off the ends as well. But like I said, I was feeling a little brave, so I used my scissors. I think I did okay. But yeah, I try not to overthink it. It's usually when I'm trying really hard to like cut a straight line that it ends up being, super crooked. Anyway, after I had trimmed them out, I'm going to adhere them to the card front with foam squares. Again, just pop them up, give them a bit of dimension. And once I've got the sentiments popped into place, I can then work on my card bases. So I decided to use Nina Desert Storm cardstock for my card bases. And my cards are top folding A2 size note cards, so 4¼ by 5½ inches. And I've put my card base into my MISTI. I took a piece of Post-it tape and lined it up right at the score line so I don't stamp past the score line. And then I'm inking up that big, beautiful floral with Petunia ink, which is a lighter shade of purple than the Pansy ink that I use for watercoloring. And that way it's not too dark so that I can write over this when I want to write the recipient. Because it will, again, soften a little bit, dry back a smidge, and it won't be too distracting. So repeated that onto the second card base. Just put my Post-it tape there just to keep me from stamping past that score line. And then once I've got the florals stamped onto the insides of these cards, I'm going to remove the score tape, remove that large stamp, and then I'm going to line up another sentiment from the Beautiful Flowers stamp set. And that I'm going to stamp with the cocoa ink. So ink that up, stamp it, and then do the same thing on the second card base. And then that's going to finish off the insides of these cards. So once I've got that, I couldn't resist also adding a dragonfly, another oldie but goodie favorite. The etched dragonfly wafer die. Love him. Love him so much. He's so perfect. So I die cut the wings from vellum. And then the body I die cut from scraps from Simon's matte gold cardstock. And then I just got to adhere them together with a little bit of glue here. So this time I adhere the wings underneath the body. With this wafer die, usually I adhere the wings on top. But trying to adhere like little bits of vellum like this on top of the matte gold cardstock gets just more finicky than I was feeling. So it looks fine either way. So once I've got my little dragonfly assembled, I'm going to adhere the card front to the card base, again, just using liquid glue. And then once that's adhered, I'm going to add my little dragonfly. And then as always, we could be done here, but I'm going to add some Pawsitively Dazzling gems, the lilac ones specifically, which always look on camera a little odd. They look a lot darker just because I'm filming straight down, so you don't see like how the light reflects on them. So they look a bit dark, but I will tilt the card in the light at the end here so you can kind of get a better idea of how these look, and then also in the finished photos. So lined up the gems where I wanted them. And then I'm just going to pick these up with my little embellishment wand and adhere them into place with just dabs of the Positively Perfect craft glue. Once those are adhered, I just have to let the glue dry and these cards are complete. So we've got all sorts of watercoloring and splatter and gold and die cuts. These were fun. These were a lot of fun. So there are the finished cards. And like I mentioned in the intro, all the supplies I used will be listed and linked in the description box below, as well as on the blog post. You can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so very much for hanging out with me today, for thumbs upping and commenting. Make sure you subscribe, and I will hopefully see you all soon in another video. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!